bombshell new lawsuit that involves Sean Diddy Combs, but isn't against the disgraced music mogul, as Diddy is listening to closing arguments in his sex trafficking and racketeering trial in federal court in New York. His son, Justin, has been hit with a lawsuit by a woman who claims that he lured her to Los Angeles to be raped by multiple men, including his dad, Sean Diddy Combs. Now, this isn't the first time that Justin has been named in a lawsuit with his famous father.
The moment the story shifts from one figure to an entire family, everything changes. What once felt contained suddenly spreads outward, touching people who were never supposed to be in the frame. The fallout deepens not because of what's confirmed.
Of this new lawsuit involving the son of Sean Diddy Combs. It was just in the hours after the government on Thursday finished their closing arguments in the case against the disgraced music mogul that we learned about this new lawsuit against Sean Combs' son, Justin. Justin is one of Diddy's 7 kids. Here he is with his dad's arm around his shoulder. Justin has been in court supporting his dad, just as his siblings have been over the past 7 weeks of testimony. Now, listen, whatever your feelings are on Sean Combs and whether you think he's guilty of the charges that could put him in federal prison for the rest of his life, you just have to think how difficult it must be to hear about all the sexual exploits of their father. But if you believe the allegations I'm about to tell you in this new lawsuit brought against Justin Combs, Justin apparently was very aware of his dad's lifestyle. The new lawsuit that just dropped was filed by a woman from Louisiana who says in 2017, Justin Combs coaxed her to come to LA because she says that Diddy's son promised her a job in the entertainment industry. She claims the two had met on Snapchat, and Justin allegedly asked for explicit pictures, and she sent them. The woman, who's not named in this suit, says when she got to LA, she was raped by several men, including a certain music mogul now at the center of this high-profile, historic trial in federal court in Lower Manhattan. Yes, Sean Diddy Combs. The alleged victim claims that Justin invited her out west for a weekend to talk about her career. But when she got there, she says she was kept in a house in Beverly Hills. And according to the lawsuit, things seemed fine at first, but when she allegedly asked Justin Combs if they were going to leave the house, he said no. She claims that Justin Combs offered her alcohol, pills, and weed, and she thinks that the weed was laced. Now, you can see in those allegations some of the comparisons in this lawsuit to the so-called freak-offs that we have been hearing about for weeks at the center of the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. The woman says after she took the drugs, 3 men entered the house and all of them were wearing masks. Now, it's unclear what kind of masks the men were wearing, but when I read that part, I thought about the testimony of Sheree Hayes in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, the escort known as the Punisher. He testified that during a freak-off, Sean Combs allegedly wore a face covering that he likened to a Muslim hijab. In the lawsuit against Justin Combs, the alleged victim says that she knew that one of the men was Diddy just because of his mannerisms, but how about this? She also knew it was Diddy because she says that Justin, as his dad, entered the home to allegedly rape a woman that he brought to LA, called Diddy, quote, Pops. Now, we see on Justin's social media that Pops is the phrase that he often uses for his dad. In this lawsuit, the alleged victim claims that she was led to a bedroom where she was allegedly told, quote, you better let this happen or else. Then she says that each man took a turn raping her, calling it a, quote, brutal gang rape. After that, she was taken to an airport on Monday and flown home. Not only is Diddy facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison if convicted of all the charges in his sex trafficking and racketeering trial, there have been nearly 80 lawsuits filed against him in civil court. Many are still active. Several of the lawsuits accuse Diddy of sexual abuse and are filed by people who are not giving their names, just like in this lawsuit that we're talking about. This also isn't the first lawsuit that Justin Combs has recently faced. Justin was named in a suit brought by music producer Rodney Jones, who goes by Little Rod. Rod claims that Diddy coerced him into sexual acts, and you can see the suit also names Justin Combs and accused Justin of covering up a shooting in 2022 at Little Rod's studio in LA with his dad. In May, a judge—
But because of what's implied, and implication is often more powerful than proof. For a long time, the structure held one powerful center, surrounded by loyalty, silence, and carefully controlled distance. Family existed in the background, protected by the assumption that blood alone was enough to keep them separate from controversy. That assumption didn't survive what came next. It never does. The first signs weren't public, they were internal. A sudden tightening of conversations, advisors lowering their voices, a shift in how often family members appeared together. The protective wall that once felt solid began to show stress fractures, not visible to the public yet, but obvious to anyone paying close attention. Then came the leak. Not dramatic, not explosive, just enough to raise questions. A detail here, a connection there, a quiet confirmation that the situation was no longer isolated. The moment the younger generation became part of the conversation, the narrative
to dismiss Justin from Little Rod's lawsuit, so he is no longer facing those allegations. As for the lawsuit filed in the hours before his dad's attorneys were to make closing arguments, E! News reports that Diddy's attorneys have denied the allegations, but it's unclear what Justin's response is at the time of this recording. Joining us now is criminal defense attorney Will Corman. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us. What stands out to you in this lawsuit that Sean Combs is named, but also his son Justin?
Well, it's interesting. I think the connection to Sean Combs is pretty tenuous. You know, we've gone through this all. It almost seems the one connection to Sean Combs that they actually put on him is the allegation that Justin called one of the masked men Pops during the course of the assault or just before the assault. That's it. The other connection, obviously, is that Sean Combs is Justin Combs' dad. So I think it's a bit of a stretch. Again, we're just receiving these documents now. We're just going through this lawsuit now. Perhaps there's more out there, but it really doesn't seem that way.
And of course, people who are victims of sexual violence, you want them to get their justice. We have seen dozens of lawsuits filed against Justin's dad in the wake of when he was indicted for the trial that he's on right now. How do you go through these lawsuits and understand who's telling the truth and who actually has a case that could be heard in court? Someone like Cassie Ventura, when you see that video from 2016, or you do look at some of these Jane Doe lawsuits and you wonder how many of them are true.
Look, as a criminal defense attorney, it's my job to be cynical, and it's my job to, review everything with a pretty jaundiced eye. So the question really becomes are there corroborating facts and circumstances from Jump Street that make sense? So for example, if this lawsuit is alleging that something happened in LA during a specific period of time, do we know that Sean Combs was there? Do we actually know that he was present in LA? These things aren't difficult to find out, but it's those baby steps to trying to build the foundation of a lawsuit to see what's realistic that really matter in a case like this. And as you so correctly said, we want victims of domestic violence, of sexual violence, and so on and so forth to actually be compensated accordingly. Unfortunately, when we have circumstances where we have somebody famous who's been charged with crimes, we have somebody famous who's been sued, there can be instances where other folks jump on the bandwagon. And I'm not suggesting that's what's happening here, but it is something that everyone needs to look at skeptically.
Right, absolutely. If you were to bring a lawsuit against someone like Justin Combs, or any of these, and even the cases involving his dad, and you're bringing a civil suit, what facts do you need to have? I mean, certainly if you have a victim who says that this happened and they're ready to, they're able to provide some corroborating evidence that something happened, what do you actually need to be able to go to the courthouse and say, I'm filing a lawsuit against this person?
I think that you need to have somebody who's willing to state under oath that this is what happened to me, that this is what I'm alleging, these are my damages, this is how it's impacted me. And as an attorney, again, I would want to make sure, especially in a lawsuit like this, where it involves a high-profile person, but quite frankly, in any lawsuit, that there is some corroborating information out there so that my lawsuit isn't tossed out of court pretty quickly.
And reading through this complaint, it mentions several other lawsuits. You have the lawsuit from Rodney Jones, who's known as Little Rod, and Sean Combs is facing that lawsuit, and his son was named.
The narrative changed permanently. Because scandals don't age well when legacy is involved. The pressure intensified overnight. What was once framed as a personal collapse turned into a systemic one. People stopped asking what happened and started asking how long it had been happening. And once that question enters the room, it never leaves quietly. Behind the scenes, panic replaced confidence. Damage control strategies that once worked suddenly failed. The old playbook assumed influence still mattered, It assumed silence could be negotiated. It assumed the public would lose interest. None of those assumptions held anymore. The younger figure didn't step forward willingly. They were pulled in by proximity, by association, by the unavoidable gravity of shared history. Every past appearance became evidence. Every shared moment became suspicious. Even neutral interactions were reinterpreted through a darker lens. That's how quickly perception turns. Inside the family, tension escalated. Conversations turned defensive. Trust thinned. Everyone started wondering who knew what, and when. The idea that ignorance could protect anyone vanished.
In it, but has since been dropped. What do you make about it having all these other different cases and elements brought in? What is the attorney here trying to prove?
Well, it almost appears as if the attorney is saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. So here are all these other lawsuits, and I've reviewed the complaint, and they talk about them in some detail. They don't just list them. They say, this happened on this date, and this person sued Sean Combs here, and this person sued Sean Combs here for this set of facts and circumstances. And they're essentially trying to say, because there's all these other lawsuits, you should give this one a stamp of approval, because again, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Tony Buzbee, his law firm is bringing this. He has been in the civil world a very, very prominent name. For those who don't know him, and you work in criminal defense, what do you know about Tony Buzbee? Knowing that it's his law firm bringing this, what does that tell you?
I don't think that the Buzbee law firm is taking these allegations lightly. I believe they have the resources to do their own investigations prior to actually filing these suits. So this isn't some, sole practitioner who's trying to jump on the cottage industry that's been created around suing Sean Combs. I think that they have the ability to investigate this. They have the ability to decide whether or not they want to take on these cases. And I think that does lend some credibility, albeit, not a ton, but I think it does lend some credibility to the facts and circumstances surrounding it. In other words, this alleged victim didn't just walk in off the street to some random law firm who then is saying, oh, we now have the ability to sue Sean Combs. This is someone who's been down this well-trod path before and probably knows exactly what the pitfalls are in suing somebody as prominent as Sean Combs.
This lawsuit came down at the time we're recording this, came down last night. So that was a couple hours after the government finished their closing arguments against Sean Combs. And as we're recording this right now, Sean Combs, his defense team is giving his closing argument. What do you make about the timing of this? It's against Justin Combs and Sean Combs' name, but it's happening right in the middle of maybe the most pivotal part of this entire trial.
I don't exactly know what to make of the timing of it. I think it's interesting. I think that I'm a little surprised that it's come out so late, but sometimes we don't know what led the alleged victim in this lawsuit to break their silence and to file this lawsuit. Perhaps they were watching the testimony or reviewing the testimony in the criminal case and said, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened to me. Perhaps they said, they listened to the testimony and they said, there are so many victims here. I believe that I am one too. We don't know what prompted it. I think the timing is interesting, but I don't know that I can make anything of it as we sit here right now.
I think of recently you had Tyler Perry, prominent name in Hollywood, very different case, but accused of sexual violence and sexual harassment, workplace harassment with an actor who had worked on one of his shows, and the actor provided text messages in the complaint. This doesn't have that. Very different case. But the fact that there's not that visual evidence that we can look at, and I don't know what type of visual evidence would exist in a case like this, but the fact that we don't particularly have those, does that take away from the weight of what this lawsuit may actually be in the end when it comes to the truth?
Well, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here because the filing of a complaint is just simply the first step. And all the complaint needs to do, on paper anyway, is set forth the factual allegations that are...
In moments like this, innocence doesn't shield you, it only delays the impact. The disturbing part wasn't just the allegations. It was the pattern. Stories from different places started sounding eerily similar, not identical, but aligned. Enough overlap to make coincidence feel unlikely, enough repetition to make denial feel weak. People who had stayed quiet for years suddenly felt emboldened, sensing the balance of power had shifted. And when power shifts, truth rushes in to fill the space. The public reaction wasn't outrage at first. It was curiosity, and curiosity is far more dangerous. Outrage burns fast. Curiosity lingers. It invites investigation. It encourages connection making. It turns spectators into analysts. Every timeline got re-examined. Every opportunity recontextualized. Every silence reinterpreted. The family name, once a shield, became a spotlight. The younger presence felt the weight of expectations they never asked for in consequence.
That are enough to sort of not get the case thrown out at the first few stages. And that bar is pretty low. So there may be tons of evidence surrounding these allegations that aren't in the lawsuit. They don't need to be in the lawsuit. Again, there needs to be just enough to get us through those first few steps. Excuse me.
As Sean Combs, we're awaiting, once the jury gets the case next week, and then we'll see what the verdict is. But guilty or not guilty, he's going to be dealing with a lot of civil cases that are still pending. What does the timeline look like for Sean Combs? Let's just say he's found not guilty of everything. What does the legal timeline look for him? How long could he be dealing with the issues related to all these civil suits?
That's a great question. First of all, I don't think he's going to be found not guilty of everything. So that's a separate issue entirely.
Yeah.
Having said that, again, different jurisdictions have different statutes of limitations for sex assault victims to bring lawsuits within which, or timelines within which they can bring the lawsuits. And so again, depending on where allegations come from, those statutes of limitations can be very long. It also matters on how old the alleged victim was at the time that the incident took place. For example, there have been a number of states which have extended statutes of limitations for minors who were sexually assaulted. Those statutes of limitations are much longer than for adults who've been sexually assaulted. So it really does depend. And I know that's not quite answering the question, but I suppose the easiest answer is it could go on for quite some time.
And you look at this complaint, the complaint is for sexual assault and battery, gender violence, negligent supervision. I think a lot of people would look at this and they'd certainly, if all of this is true, what a horrific experience that this victim went through. Why is this not a criminal case?
That's a great question. And I suppose that this victim could have brought this to the county attorney's office or whatever local prosecutorial body there are. We don't know the answer to that. Perhaps quite frankly, we simply don't know the answer to that. But it's also important to remember this, that Sean Combs is named in this lawsuit. I have reviewed this lawsuit. The connection to Sean Combs is pretty thin from a legal standpoint. It just is. So we don't know why this wasn't brought forth criminally. Perhaps the person decided they would rather seek their own form of justice from a civil standpoint. Sean Combs has a lot going on criminally right now, and perhaps it wouldn't even be prosecuted. Again, if he's found guilty of all these offenses in federal court in New York, Sean Combs is going to prison for decades. He's 55 years old. Not that old, but he's still going to prison for a very long time. So I don't know that the LA District Attorney's Office or whatever prosecutorial body is out there would bother pursuing criminal charges if Sean Combs at age 55 just gets a 30-year sentence federal.
And for Justin Combs, and I assume he'll have, I don't know if he has a trust or an inheritance or how he financially makes a living. Certainly it's part of being in the circle of Sean Combs. How does he pay for an attorney? Is that have to come from it? Because I think if Sean Combs is found guilty and all this money, and he's got a lot, but maybe we don't know how much money Sean Combs has, frankly, but we know that it's going to a lot of these cases. How does Justin Combs defend himself? Does this get wrapped into, if his dad's going to have to defend against this, is it a 2-for-1 when it comes from the defense side?
It could be. We certainly don't know what the corporate structure is of Bad Boy Records and all the other entities that are named as defendants in this lawsuit. I have a feeling that Justin Combs will get counsel. I have a feeling that Justin Combs will get excellent counsel. How it gets paid for.
They never prepared for. Legacy doesn't come with instructions for collapse. Behind closed doors, strategies clashed. Some wanted to speak. Others wanted silence. Some believed distancing was survival. Others believed unity was the only defense. No one agreed because there was no winning move left. Every option carried risk. Every delay made things worse. The emotional toll became visible. Not through statements, but through absence. withdrawn appearances, canceled plans, a noticeable retreat from spaces once occupied with confidence. The world notices when people disappear, especially when they're expected to stand tall. And disappearance breeds speculation. The deeper the story went, the more it stopped being about individual actions and started becoming about environment, about what was normalized, about what was ignored, about what power made possible. That's when the narrative turned from scandal to reckoning. The younger figure found themselves trapped between generations, too close to walk away clean.
Combs denied everything until CNN got a hold of that video in May. And we're talking about a lawsuit that was filed in April, I believe. And again, I don't know if it's true, but the allegations are that much of this was recorded and there's audio recordings. And if so, and she's saying no, and Christian is moving forward anyway, then you have attempted sexual assault.
Talking about audio and video recordings, that's what's huge in this case. I mean, we heard a lot about it from Cassie in her lawsuit, then of course Lil Rod, and now confirmed in the federal indictment that the feds are saying, yep, we've got some, and that's what led to this indictment and his charges. But what's interesting is that in Lil Rod's lawsuit, he actually has photos, like screenshots of a recording of Justin Combs, and he says it's allegedly with a sex worker. Do you think that part is incriminating too, that the feds may be looking at that recording?
I do. And during Combs' initial appearance before the new judge, Subramanian, there was some discussion of this. And Christian and Justin were in court as well, supporting their father. But the feds were talking about the 96 different electronic devices they seized and the terabytes and terabytes of data. Now, some of it might not be relevant, but some of it may be very much on point, because going back to Cassie's original allegation, Combs reportedly recorded many of these sex acts. It might have been for his sexual pleasure. It might have been to maintain control over the participants. But whether it's a voluntary recording, whether it's a hotel security camera, whether it's something that Lil Rod, took in a still video or a recording, or whether it's something that, a civil plaintiff, a victim of sexual assault, I try not to name them, even though she did out herself in the complaint, took without the knowledge of Christian or others. It's all very, very powerful, because oftentimes when you're dealing with sexual assault and sexual abuse, these are things that happen behind closed doors, right? Could be at a home, could be at a hotel. In this case, could be on a yacht. And usually there aren't a whole lot of witnesses to it. So you will have a he said, she said type situation in many, many cases. Well, a recording can really change that narrative, because again, it can really corroborate the story of one side or the other.
In regards to Justin specifically and these alleged recordings, audio, all of that, so that's in relation to Lil Rod's lawsuit. He's actually a co-defendant listed quite a few times throughout this. And in addition to him sitting next to this alleged prostitute, we have that photo. There's also allegations that he actually partook in these freak-offs and potentially drugged women. This is something Lil Rod is saying. How would the feds go about proving something like that? I know that's the pattern we've seen across a lot of these civil suits, that women allege Diddy, for instance, drugged them. But now Lil Rod's also pointing the finger at Justin Combs, saying he drugged some of these women. How would the feds then go to look further into that?
Yeah, Lil Rod's lawsuit is interesting in that there are many defendants. We talked about Christina Horam, right? Some of the allegations that came out in Lil Rod's lawsuit was Christina, of course, being Combs' right-hand woman. She allegedly had the fanny pack with the drugs that were provided to the sex workers. There are the allegations directly against Justin as well. So whenever you're proving something like this, obviously, you're going to rely on the testimony of witnesses. It could be an independent witness, because the sex workers, even though they're participants in a sex act, they won't necessarily be charged, or I don't think they're going to be defendants in the lawsuit, if the allegation is that they were forced to perform these sex acts and it wasn't just a commercial transaction. So you can rely on that testimony. Obviously, Lil Rod himself, but he's a plaintiff.
Too distant to control the past. Every attempt to assert independence was questioned. Every attempt to stay loyal was criticized. There was no safe ground left. Inside the family, fractures widened. Private disagreements became public through leaks and second-hand accounts. People outside the circle suddenly knew more than they should. That's when you know containment has failed. When secrets stop being secrets, they become weapons. The fallout wasn't just reputational. It was structural. Business relationships quietly dissolved. Invitations stopped coming. Partnerships froze without explanation. The cost of association became too high, and self-preservation always wins in the end. What made this situation especially unsettling was how fast it escalated. 1 week earlier, the family name still carried weight. 1 week later, it carried risk. That's how quickly perception rewrites reality when enough doubt accumulates. The younger figure didn't create the storm, but they were caught in it.
And if so, his testimony may be biased, may be true, but it's certainly something that you would want more of if you are a prosecutor. And then you look to video and you look to other types of evidence, maybe text messages, something that corroborates what Lil Rod has said. And of course, if you have someone like Horam who flips, that would be very, very helpful for prosecutors, because we know that former employees, they usually have a lot of information and they can be leveraged in a criminal case or even a civil one to cooperate to save themselves.
I want to talk more about that, the flipping of all this, because right now Diddy is the only one who has been charged federally in relation to this scheme, this alleged scheme. But as you pointed out, there are other people who have been identified as participants in all this. Christina Coram obviously is the main one, along with the Combs enterprise or empire, whatever you want to call it. She has not yet been charged, but I'm pretty sure, as you've told me in the past, probably this interview and many others, the feds are going to be talking to Christina Coram, and it would be in her best interest likely to cooperate with them. But what about Justin and Christian? I mean, they're so close to Diddy. They're his sons, and they have accusations against them. They could, as you said, face these charges in the future. What do you think? Do you think that they would flip?
I think it's a lot less likely that Justin and Christian would flip. I've seen children testify against their parents. We've seen it on Law and Crime many times, and obviously it makes for great drama and courtroom theatrics. But I think in a case like this, it's going to be less likely. They really owe everything to their father, right? He's obviously someone with significant financial means. He's someone that's going to pay for their lawyers and protect them. I think it would be pretty surprising to see a flip like that. Of course, anything's possible, but I think it's less likely, given that there are people that really don't have that familial tie. They don't have their legacy. They don't have potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to lose if they end up turning sideways on their parents. So it's obviously a possibility. I think it's highly unlikely, especially what we saw during that first hearing. The children all being in court, directly supporting Combs, him waving and blowing kisses to them. I think a flip is unlikely with respect to Justin and Christian.
Yeah, what do you make of that? Obviously, they're supporting their father, as you've discussed. They were actually in the courtroom supporting him, as you said, blowing kisses, all of that. But then there's also headlines, photos, videos of Christian Combs, who's been out partying after all this. People are obviously clamoring at any sort of Diddy news. But do these two have to kind of keep in mind that the focus is going to be on them? They are being watched, I mean, in relation to what their dad was doing, but also their allegations against them. I mean, is this something they should be keeping in mind, their public image?
I do, Sierra, and it's not just about the courtroom. We've talked about the court of public opinion in a case like this, and the jurors are ordinary people, and everyone knows who Sean Diddy Combs is. And if there's this sort of very high-profile criminal trial happening in May or sometime in 2025, and the perception is that the family doesn't take this seriously, they're partying, they're drinking, it really plays into some of the allegations that this was just a party lifestyle, and these individuals thought that they were above the law. Now, again, I'm not saying that jurors don't follow the instructions in the law, and they're really supposed to decide the case solely based on the facts and evidence in the case. But we've seen it time and time again. It could be Johnny Depp, it could be Michael Jackson. Whenever you have someone who's high profile, and the narrative, the public perception, the PR.
And storms don't care who deserves what. They just move. As more disturbing details surfaced, the story took on a life of its own. It no longer needed confirmation to grow. It fed on momentum. Each new piece, whether verified or not, pushed the narrative further into dangerous territory. The silence from the center became deafening. Not because words were expected, but because silence now felt intentional. In moments like this, quiet stops being neutral and starts feeling strategic, and strategy invites suspicion. The family's internal struggle mirrored the public one. Once the connection was made, it didn't matter how thin it was. Association alone was enough. That's how these moments work. Guilt doesn't need to be proven when perception takes control. The public doesn't ask whether someone caused the fire, only whether they were standing close enough to feel the heat. The shock wasn't that scrutiny expanded, the shock was how fast it happened. One day, the focus was narrow, the next, everything tied to the
Really, machine goes in one way, it can really help shape the opinions in the courtroom as well.
So we've talked about these sexual assault allegations that are against both Justin and Christian, but there's another incident that's pointed out in Lil Rod's civil suit, and this is in regards to Justin. I just want to touch on this one quick, that apparently there was a shooting at one of Diddy's recording studios years ago, and that Justin and Diddy apparently covered this up. Somebody was obviously shot and injured in this incident. There were reports on it, but not in relation to either of those two. Is this something that the feds would pursue? I mean, I know that the main part of the case is these sexual assault allegations, but could they head down that road toward attempted murder with a gunshot wound?
Potentially, and I've gotten this question a lot with respect to obviously the killing of Tupac, both in 1996 and the attempted murder in 1994. And a lot of people, I'm sure, watching believe that Combs, had something to do with that. I think it's challenging because then you start going in a very different direction, a rabbit hole. You're charging something that may be more difficult to prove, involving a shooting. You don't necessarily have the victim who's there testifying. And, what I've seen from U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, and not just this case, and others as well, for instance, how he's handling the New York Mayor Eric Adams case, he is really keeping the surgical, he's keeping the charges narrow. That's why we're not seeing a kitchen sink approach. And sometimes we see that from prosecutors, for instance, in the Young Thug YSL case, everyone is being charged, right? Lots of different defendants, lots of different charges going, spanning over years. I don't think that's something that we're going to see here. I can't see that this prosecutor is going to charge things that aren't very easy to prove, because of that, when you start creating potential doubt, even though these are very serious allegations, obviously murder, attempted murder, we're talking about Tupac probably being the greatest rapper of our lifetime. I don't think this is something that we're going to see added to the charges in this case, because I think this specific prosecutor wants to keep things very narrow and very surgical.
So unclear about all this, whether any charges, if and when, they could be added. But if we're talking about the defense now, switching to their side of things, I'm sure obviously they're talking to Diddy, but I'm wondering about their conversations with Christian and Justin. Do you think that the defense attorneys, their team, would be reaching out to both of them to talk and kind of bulk up Diddy's side of the case?
Sure. I'm sure that anyone who's a witness, whether it's a family member or someone else who was there, really needs a lawyer, because they may get subpoenaed. They may have to testify at trial or before the grand jury. Now, of course, everyone has the right to remain silent, and they can invoke if there's any criminal liability. But ultimately, everyone's going to need their own lawyers because there's a potential conflict. Obviously, Combs and Christian, they have financial means. They're going to have their own lawyers. But I mean, no question, whether it's a family member, whether it's a celebrity, whether it's someone who was a witness, just happened to be there, there's the possibility that they're contacted by law enforcement, HSI, and other federal agents. So they should have a lawyer, and they need to make a decision whether they're going to remain silent, cooperate, or do something else.
And now it's important to know that all three of these people we're talking about today, Diddy, Justin Combs, Christian Combs, have denied all of these allegations against them. So that's important to talk about. But also, we do still have that civil suit specifically against Christian Combs here. But where does all of that land now? That we have Diddy, who's been indicted federally, he's facing these charges, but the civil suits, are they now kind of taking a back seat?
That's absolutely right, Sierra. What's going to happen is they're going to be stayed to the extent that Diddy is a defendant, because
name was under a microscope. Old footage, old statements, old relationships, things that once seemed harmless were suddenly suspicious. Context evaporated. Everything got flattened into one narrative: power, silence, protection. The younger figure didn't walk into this willingly. They were pulled in by proximity and history, by the unavoidable reality that legacy doesn't care about personal choice. When a foundation cracks, it doesn't ask which floors deserve to stay intact. Behind the scenes, panic set in quickly. There was no script for this version of the fallout. Advisors scrambled, messages conflicted, some voices pushed for distance, others for unity. No one could agree because no one knew which move would cause less damage. Every option looked like a mistake. Every delay felt dangerous. What made the situation darker wasn't a single accusation or claim, it was the pattern forming around it. The sense that this wasn't random, that it wasn't new, that it had simply reached the point where silence could no longer hold it down. Confusion, fear, anger, denial, all happening at once. No clear enemy, no clear escape, just the slow realization that the past had finally caught up, and it wasn't interested in compromise. The most unsettling realization came late. This wasn't about saving an image anymore. It was about surviving the collapse of one. And when legacy falls apart, it doesn't do so gently. It pulls everything connected to it down at the same time, regardless of intention, regardless of guilt, regardless of readiness. The fallout deepened not because of a single scandal, but because of what it revealed about how long the silence lasted. And once that silence breaks, there's no putting it back together.